My name is David Wilkins. I'm 64 years old and have spent most of my life working this land just outside of Hastings, Nebraska. I never thought I'd be the one telling a story like this. I've always been practical, never believed in monsters or things that go bump in the night. That changed 3 months ago, and I'm still not sure if I'll ever sleep properly again. I inherited this farm from my father, who got it from his father before him. 3 generations of Wilkins men have worked this soil, growing corn and raising a few cattle on the side. My wife Martha passed 5 years ago from cancer, and since then, it's just been me and my old border collie Rex. My children have their own lives in Lincoln and Omaha, visiting only on holidays and the occasional weekend. The trouble started in early October when the harvest was almost done. I'd been noticing strange things around the property. Broken fences that couldn't be explained by weather or normal wear, livestock acting skittish, and tracks I couldn't identify crossing my fields. At first I figured it was just coyotes or maybe a mountain lion passing through, though those are rare around here. One evening I was finishing up in the barn when Rex started barking like I'd never heard before. Not his usual alert bark, but something primal and frightened. I called him to heel, but he wouldn't stop. He stood at the barn door, hackles raised, growling at something in the darkness beyond. "What is it, boy?" I asked, grabbing my flashlight. The beam cut through the autumn darkness, sweeping across the yard between the barn and my farmhouse about 100 yards away. Nothing seemed out of place, but Rex wouldn't calm down. I decided to head back to the house, shotgun in hand. Not that I expected trouble, but 30 years of rural living teaches you to be prepared. Rex stayed close to my leg, still growling as we crossed the yard. That's when I heard it, a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite human. It came from the cornfield to my right, where a few acres still stood waiting for harvest. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, and for just a second, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the corn stalks. Something large, too large to be a coyote, too large even to be a person, unless they were unnaturally tall and broad. The beam of light reflected off eyes that glowed amber in the darkness, set high above the ground. "Hello?" I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is private property." No response came except the rustling of corn stalks as whatever it was moved deeper into the field. I considered going after it, but decided against it. Whatever was out there, confronting it alone in the dark didn't seem wise. That night, I double-checked all the locks and kept my shotgun by the bed. Rex refused to sleep in his usual spot in the kitchen, instead pacing restlessly through the house until I finally let him curl up at the foot of my bed. Neither of us slept much. The next morning, I found 3 of my cattle dead near the edge of the property. Not just dead, torn apart. In my 40 years of farming, I'd seen animals killed by predators before, but nothing like this. They hadn't been eaten, just destroyed. It looked like something had been in a rage. I called the sheriff, of course. Sheriff Mike Daniels had been a friend for decades, and I trusted his judgment. He came out, took pictures, wrote up a report, and suggested it might be a pack of feral dogs. But he didn't look convinced by his own theory. "Never seen dogs do damage like this," he admitted, looking at the carcasses. "Keep that shotgun handy, David. And maybe think about coming into town for a few nights until we figure this out." But I couldn't leave my farm. Stubborn, perhaps, but it was my responsibility. So I stayed, and for a few days, nothing happened. I nearly convinced myself it had been a one-time thing. Maybe a bear passing through, though bears aren't common in this part of Nebraska. 5 nights later, I was awakened around midnight by Rex barking frantically downstairs. I grabbed my shotgun and moved to the window, looking out over the moonlit farm. The nearly full moon cast enough light to see most of the yard, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Standing in the middle of my yard was a figure. At first glance, it might have been a man, but something was wrong with the proportions. It stood on 2 legs, but they were bent wrongly, like a dog's hind legs. Its arms hung too long at its sides, ending in what looked like clawed hands. But it was the head that made me question my sanity. Elongated like a wolf's, with pointed ears that stood straight up. It was looking directly at my house, and I swear it knew I was watching. Then it tilted back its head and made a sound that will haunt me until my dying day. A howl that started like a wolf's but twisted into something that sounded almost like human words, distorted through an inhuman throat. I'm not ashamed to admit I was terrified. I'd lived through storms that flattened buildings. I'd faced down-armed trespassers. I'd even survived a combine accident that should have taken my leg. But nothing had ever made me feel the primal fear I felt looking at that thing. It began moving toward the house, not rushing, but with deliberate steps. I raised my shotgun, opened the window, and fired a warning shot into the air. The creature paused, looked at me for what felt like an eternity, then turned and loped off toward the woods at the edge of my property, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I found tracks in the yard, deep impressions that looked like a bizarre mixture of wolf and human footprints, far larger than either should be. I called Sheriff Daniels again, and to his credit, he came right out. He examined the tracks, took more pictures, and didn't dismiss my story outright, though I could tell he was struggling to make sense of it. "David," he said finally, "I've known you too long to think you're making this up or seeing things, but I don't know what to tell you. I'll reach out to the State Wildlife Service, see if they've had reports of anything unusual." "Mike, this wasn't any animal I've ever seen," I told him. "At least not any natural one." He gave me a long look. "What are you saying exactly?" I couldn't bring myself to say the word. It sounded too ridiculous, too much like something from a horror movie. But Mike had been my friend for 40 years. "I think it might be a werewolf," I said finally, waiting for him to laugh. He didn't laugh. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment. "My grandmother was Pawnee," he said eventually. "She used to tell stories about shapeshifters. I always thought they were just stories to scare kids into behaving." He sighed. "Look, whatever it is, it's dangerous. I'm going to have a deputy patrol out this way more frequently for a while." That was something, at least. But we both knew that if what I saw came back, a deputy driving by every few hours wouldn't help much. The next few days passed without incident. I began to wonder if the creature had moved on, perhaps scared off by my shotgun. I started to relax slightly, though I still kept Rex close and my gun closer. Then came the night of the full moon. I should have been prepared. Every story about werewolves says they're at their strongest during the full moon, but even after what I'd seen, part of me still couldn't believe I was dealing with something supernatural. So I wasn't ready when it came back. I was in the kitchen when the power went out, not unusual in rural areas, especially with the wind picking up outside. I was reaching for the flashlight I keep in the drawer when Rex started that fearful barking again. Before I could react, there was a tremendous crash from the front of the house, the sound of splintering wood and breaking glass. It had broken through my front door. I grabbed my shotgun from where it leaned against the wall and backed toward the rear door. Rex was going crazy, barking and growling. I heard heavy footsteps in my living room, the sound of furniture being overturned. "Rex, come!" I hissed, but he was too worked up. To my horror, he charged toward the living room, toward whatever had broken in. There was a yelp, then silence. My faithful companion for 12 years, gone in an instant. Rage temporarily overcame my fear. I raised the shotgun and moved toward the living room. In the dim moonlight coming through the windows, I could make out a massive silhouette. It was hunched over Rex's still form, but it straightened when I entered, rising to what must have been 7 feet tall. Its eyes reflected the moonlight like yellow lamps. I fired without hesitation. The blast was deafening in the confined space, and the creature staggered backward. But it didn't fall. A shot that would have dropped a bear only seemed to anger it. It roared, a sound no natural animal could make, and lunged toward me. I didn't have time to fire again. I turned and ran for the back door, fumbling with the lock as I heard it coming behind me. I got the door open and stumbled onto my back porch, losing my balance and falling down the steps into the yard. The fall might have saved my life. As I hit the ground, I heard the creature crash through the doorway above me. It leaped over me, landing a few feet away, then turned to face me. In the full moonlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was like a nightmare come to life. It stood on 2 legs like a man but was covered in dark, matted fur. Its face was a horrific blend of human and wolf features. A long snout filled with fangs, but with eyes that held a terrible intelligence. Its hands ended in curved claws, that looked capable of tearing through steel. I scrambled backward, reaching desperately for the shotgun I dropped in my fall. My hand closed around the barrel just as the creature lunged. I swung the gun like a club, catching it across the snout. It yelped in pain and surprise, giving me just enough time to stagger to my feet. I knew I couldn't outrun it. My only hope was to make it to my truck and pray the keys were still in the ignition, where I sometimes left them. I started backing toward the driveway, keeping the shotgun pointed at the creature. It paced back and forth, watching me, seeming to savor my fear. I had the distinct impression it was playing with me, enjoying the chase. That was when I realized this wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. There was a malevolent intelligence behind those eyes. "What do you want?" I found myself asking, though I didn't expect an answer. The creature tilted its head, almost like it was considering the question. Then it did something that chilled me even more than its appearance. It smiled, revealing rows of yellow fangs. I turned and ran for the truck. Behind me, I heard it howl, then the sound of it giving chase. My old legs carried me faster than they had in decades, fueled by pure terror. I reached the truck, yanked open the door, and nearly wept with relief when I saw the keys dangling from the ignition. I threw myself inside and slammed the door, just as the creature reached the truck. It slammed into the side, rocking the vehicle on its suspension. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The creature was at the window now, its claws scraping against the glass. I could see its hot breath fogging the window as it snarled and snapped. I threw the truck into reverse and hit the gas. The creature clung to the side for a moment before falling away. I spun the wheel, shifted to drive, and floored it down my long driveway, not daring to look back. I drove straight to town, to the sheriff's office. Mike was on duty, and the look on my face must have told him everything he needed to know. He led me to his office, sat me down, and poured me a shot of whiskey from the bottle he kept in his desk drawer. "It came back," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my hands still shaking. "It killed Rex, broke right through my front door. I shot it, Mike. Point blank with a shotgun, and it barely flinched." Mike was quiet for a long moment. "You can't go back there," he said finally. "That's my home," I protested. "My livelihood. And that thing, whatever it is, will kill you if you go back alone." He leaned forward. "Stay at the motel tonight. Tomorrow we'll get some men together and go out there in daylight." I didn't have much choice. I was exhausted, terrified, and in no shape to do anything else. So I spent the night at Hastings' only motel, jumping at every sound, seeing yellow eyes in every shadow. The next morning, Mike had assembled a group of 5 deputies and 3 local hunters who he trusted. We armed ourselves and drove out to my farm in a convoy. I wasn't sure what we'd find. Part of me hoped the creature would be gone, and another part hoped it would still be there, so I could prove I wasn't crazy. The farm was quiet when we arrived. Too quiet. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. The front door of my house hung from broken hinges, and inside was chaos. Furniture overturned, claw marks on the walls. Rex's body still lying where he had fallen. "Jesus," one of the deputies whispered. We searched the house and barn, but found no sign of the creature. Then one of the hunters called from the edge of the property. We hurried over to find him standing by a trail of blood leading into the woods. "Something wounded went this way," he said. "Recently, Mike organized us into teams of 2, and we followed the blood trail into the forest. I was paired with Mike himself, which I suspected was so he could keep an eye on me. We moved carefully, weapons ready, following the increasingly sparse droplets of dark blood. About a mile into the woods, we found an old storm cellar, the kind farmers used to build as tornado shelters before modern basement construction. It was set into a hillside, its wooden doors weathered and partially hidden by undergrowth. It clearly hadn't been used in decades, except that the padlock that should have secured it had been broken, and one of the doors stood slightly ajar. The blood trail led directly to it. Mike and I exchanged glances. He keyed his radio and called the others to our position, then approached the cellar cautiously, his pistol drawn. I followed with my shotgun ready. "Police!" Mike called out. "Anyone in there? Come out now!" No response came from the darkness beyond the door. The others arrived, surrounding the cellar. Mike nodded to one of the deputies, who moved forward and pulled the door fully open, his gun trained on the darkness below. A stench wafted out that made us all recoil. The smell of decay and something else, something musky and animal. Mike pulled out his flashlight and shined it down the concrete steps leading into the earth. "Stay here," he told me. Then he and two deputies descended into the cellar. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Mike's voice called up, "David, you should see this." I hesitated, then made my way down the steps, another deputy following close behind me. The cellar was larger than I expected, with several rooms branching off a main chamber. The walls were old concrete, stained with moisture and other things I didn't want to identify. Mike stood in one of the side rooms, his flashlight illuminating what appeared to be a living space. There was a cot with tangled blankets, canned food stacked in one corner, and a battery-powered lantern. But what caught my attention were the walls. They were covered with newspaper clippings, maps, and handwritten notes. The clippings detailed livestock mutilations and mysterious sightings across several states, going back decades. The maps had locations circled with dates written beside them. Many of the handwritten notes were difficult to decipher, written in a cramped, frantic style, but the ones I could read spoke of the change and controlling it and the hunger. "Someone's been living here," Mike said quietly. "For quite some time by the looks of it." "But where are they now?" I asked. "That's what I'm wondering." He moved his flashlight beam to the cot. There was blood on the blankets, fresh blood. "If your shot wounded it..." He didn't need to finish the thought. If the creature was actually a human that somehow transformed and I had wounded it, then it might have returned to human form, still carrying its injuries. We completed our search of the cellar, but found no one. The blood trail we had followed seemed to end there. It was as if whatever had been bleeding had simply vanished, or had patched itself up and left while we were searching elsewhere. We gathered what evidence we could from the cellar, the notes, the maps, some personal items that might help identify whoever had been living there. Then we returned to town to regroup and plan our next move. The following days were tense. I stayed in town, at Mike's insistence, while patrols watched my farm. We went through the materials from the cellar, trying to make sense of them. Most of the notes appeared to be the ramblings of someone struggling with something they couldn't control, documenting episodes of the change and attempts to predict or prevent it. One note particularly stood out. It read, "Full moon worst, but not only trigger now. Anger, fear, pain, all can bring it. Running out of places to hide. Nebraska next. Remote. Few people." "Sounds like whoever wrote this has been moving around," Mike observed. "Staying ahead of suspicion, maybe." We cross-referenced the dates and locations on the maps with news reports and found a pattern of livestock mutilations and occasional missing persons cases that followed the path this person seemed to have taken across the country. A week passed with no further sightings. I was beginning to think that whoever, or whatever, had been terrorizing my farm had moved on, perhaps driven away by the wound I'd inflicted and the subsequent investigation. I decided it was time to return home. Mike argued against it, but I was stubborn. It was my farm, my life's work. I couldn't abandon it based on fear. "At least let me assign a deputy to stay with you for a while," Mike insisted. I agreed to that compromise, and Deputy Johnson, a young but capable officer, accompanied me back to the farm. We spent the day cleaning up the mess in my house, boarding up the broken door, and trying to restore some normalcy. That night, I slept fitfully in my own bed for the first time since the attack. Johnson took the guest room down the hall, his service weapon close at hand. Nothing disturbed us, and the next day passed uneventfully as well. I began to relax slightly, to believe that perhaps the nightmare was over. I even started making plans to get a new dog, though I knew no one could replace Rex. On the third night, I was awakened by a soft knocking at my bedroom door. I sat up, instantly alert. "Mr. Wilkins?" Johnson's voice came through the door. "I heard something outside. I'm going to check it out." "Wait," I called, reaching for my shotgun. "I'm coming with you." "No, sir. Stay inside where it's safe. I'll just take a quick look around." Before I could protest further, I heard his footsteps moving away down the hall. I got up and quickly pulled on my clothes, then grabbed my shotgun and followed. The house was dark and quiet. I moved to the front window and looked out. The moon was waning, but still bright enough to illuminate the yard. I could see Johnson moving cautiously across the open space, his flashlight beam sweeping back and forth. He reached the edge of the barnyard and paused, shining his light towards something I couldn't see from my angle. Then he took a step forward, and suddenly he was airborne, lifted by something that had lunged from the shadows. I heard his scream cut short as he was dragged into the darkness beside the barn. I should have called for help. I should have barricaded myself in the house and waited for morning. But all I could think was that a young man was being killed on my property, and it was my responsibility. I grabbed my phone, called 911, and quickly reported what had happened, then hung up before the dispatcher could tell me to stay put. I checked my shotgun, made sure it was loaded with the heaviest shot I had, and went out the back door. I moved quietly around the side of the house, keeping to the shadows, my eyes straining to adjust to the darkness. When I reached the corner that would give me a view of the barn, I hesitated, listening. I could hear something, a wet, tearing sound that made my stomach turn. I took a deep breath and looked around the corner. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. The creature was hunched over Johnson's body, but it wasn't the same as before. It seemed bigger, more monstrous. Its fur was matted with blood, and its movements as it fed were both animal and horribly human at the same time. I raised my shotgun, aimed carefully, and fired. The blast caught the creature in the shoulder, spinning it around. It roared in pain and rage, then its yellow eyes found me in the darkness. I worked the pump and fired again, and again. Each shot seemed to hurt it, but not enough to stop it. It began moving toward me, wounded but driven by fury. My fourth shot caught it in the chest, and it staggered. For a moment I thought it might fall, then it straightened and let out a howl that seemed to shake the very air. I turned and ran. My old legs couldn't move fast enough, and I could hear it behind me, gaining ground with each second. I wouldn't make it back to the house. In desperation, I veered toward my tractor, which was parked near the tool shed. If I could get on it, start it. I never made it. Something hit me from behind, sending me sprawling to the ground. My shotgun flew from my hands, landing just out of reach. I rolled onto my back, looking up at the monster looming over me. Its jaws were open, saliva dripping from yellow fangs. I was certain my last sight in this world would be those terrible teeth closing on my throat. Then headlights swept across the yard as a vehicle came roaring up my driveway. The creature's head snapped up, momentarily distracted. It was just enough time for me to lunge for my shotgun. My hand closed around the barrel as the creature's attention returned to me. It swiped with one massive paw, claws raking across my chest. The pain was immediate and intense, but adrenaline kept me moving. I brought the gun up and pulled the trigger. Click, empty. The creature seemed to understand, and I swear it smiled again. It leaned closer, its hot breath washing over my face. Then multiple gunshots rang out in rapid succession. The creature jerked and howled as bullets tore into it from behind. It whirled to face this new threat. I saw Mike standing by his cruiser, his service pistol extended in a two-handed grip, firing steadily. The creature charged him. Mike stood his ground, emptying his magazine into the oncoming monster. It faltered, stumbled, but kept coming. Just as it reached him, Mike drew a second weapon, a large revolver, from an ankle holster and fired point blank into the creature's face. It collapsed at his feet, twitching and making terrible sounds somewhere between growls and moans. Mike fired again, and the creature went still. For a long moment, we both stayed frozen, me on the ground, bleeding. Mike standing over the fallen monster, gun still aimed at it. Then Mike rushed to check on me. "Ambulance is on the way," he said, examining the claw marks on my chest. "Hold on, David." I tried to respond, but found I couldn't catch my breath. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was becoming overwhelming. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was Mike looking back at the creature's body with an expression of disbelief. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital in Lincoln. My chest was heavily bandaged, and I had tubes and wires connecting me to various machines. Mike was sitting in a chair beside my bed, looking exhausted. "Welcome back," he said when he saw my eyes open. "Johnson?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mike shook his head. "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, grief and guilt washing over me. The creature? There was a long pause before Mike answered. That's complicated. He told me that after I'd passed out, he'd gone back to check on the creature's body, only to find it changing. By the time the ambulance and backup arrived, what lay in my yard was not a 7-foot monster, but the body of a man. Middle-aged, ordinary-looking, except for the bullet wounds and the strange, half-healed injury to his shoulder that might have come from a shotgun blast. We ID'd him from fingerprints, Mike said. His name was Gerald Kemp. He had a record. Nothing violent, just vagrancy, trespassing. He'd been diagnosed with severe mental illness years ago, but had stopped taking his medication and dropped out of the system. I tried to process this. So it was, what? Some kind of delusion? Mass hysteria? Mike rubbed his face. The official report says we encountered an armed suspect who had killed Deputy Johnson and attacked you. I shot him while defending you. That's what's going in the books. But we both know what we saw, I said. He met my eyes. We do. And there's no explanation for it that fits into any world I understand. The body is human now. The autopsy will show a human. Science will tell us he was just a man. Then what really happened? I asked. Mike shook his head. I don't know, David. I've been a cop for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what I saw that night. But I know what bullets did to it, and no human could have taken that many shots and still been charging me. We fell silent for a while, both lost in our thoughts. What happens now? I finally asked. Now you heal. Then you decide if you want to go back to that farm or sell it and move somewhere else. Somewhere with more people and fewer shadows. It's been 3 months since that night. I did go back to the farm, though many thought I was crazy to do so. I had to. It's my home, my heritage. But I've made changes. Better security, more lights, a new dog, a German shepherd named Max who guards the place with fierce devotion. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is right, I think I hear howling in the distance. Mike says they've tracked down all of Gerald Kemp's movements, found all his hiding places, and there's no evidence he wasn't alone. But sometimes I wonder if there are more like him out there. I don't go out much after dark anymore, and I keep my shotgun loaded with silver buckshot now. Mike managed to get me some, though he won't say how, just in case. Because once you've seen something that shouldn't exist in the rational world, you can never truly convince yourself it was the only one of its kind.